Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our seminar. Our today's presenter is Claire Dodd, who is a PhD candidate at the School of Agriculture and Environment and a research fellow at the Center for Environmental Economics and Policy. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for being here. I'm here to present on some side work that came out of my PhD that has been really fun. So this is a work in progress. These are some preliminary results that were put together just in time for this presentation. So I'm really open to feedback on how to improve the actual work. So I'm presenting this presentation on preferences for trees, but I'm part of a broader research group that's worked together on this project. Any one of us could have been the one presenting today. So this is with Curtis as another PhD student, and our supervisors, David Panel and Michael Burton, and two German collaborators, Katrin Raydans and Jürgen Meyerhoff. And the reason why we all got together is through this amazing program called Green Talents, which has unfortunately since stopped running, because I would love to use this as an opportunity to tell students to apply. But this program, both Curtis and I both won awards to collaborate with a German that we find is doing really interesting work and that we'd like to learn from. So that's how we connected in with Katrin and Jürgen, and rather than just working one-on-one with them, we decided to make a super team and pool our resources. So that involved visits to the University of Kiel and also the Berlin School of Economics and Law as part of this Green Talents program. So we got together as a big team and we had to think, what do we want to work on as part of our Green Talents collaboration? And given that there was a lot of work that we'd already started as part of my PhD on public open spaces, we decided to build on that topic, but with more of a focus on trees. So as part of my PhD, I did a survey on public preferences for different program attributes for verge conversion programs. So that's about the gardens on the verges themselves. But a lot of people commented on that survey saying, what the heck, you're just focusing on gardens. We want to see more on trees. People were quite worked up in the comments section. And someone even sent a letter to the newspaper. People cared enough that they made it public.
And they blamed me.
And they blamed you, which is great. Because we recruited for this survey using postcards that included David Panel's contact details. And I think you also got some phone calls. Yeah. So this is a letter to the Subiaco Post newspaper. And they say, shame on you, city of Subiaco. It was not the city of Subiaco that did the survey, it was us, for not including trees in the survey about verges. Many residents rightly regard the appropriate selection and placement of trees as the most important aspect of verge design and utility. For example, some things are great in parks, but not so great on verges, and all trees are beautiful unless they're in the wrong place because, unless they're the wrong trees because they're in the wrong place. So they had a lot of things to say about this, and so we responded with a bit of a plain response. Although we did think of some more interesting responses that we could do, carrying on with this restaurant analogy. To leave trees out of the surveys, like excluding food and menus from a restaurant survey. And we were going to respond and say, well, dessert is yet to come with our tree survey, but yeah. So all this to say that people care about verge trees, maybe more than we expected, and that kind of inspired us to decide to focus on verge trees for this project. More than just being motivated by people writing into the newspaper, there is some policy context to this work. We know that street trees provide a range of ecosystem services. They provide cooling through evapotranspiration, they provide shading, they provide habitat and biodiversity benefits. We also know that there are strategies at the local and state government level that aim to increase tree canopy cover. And different governments are going about this in different ways. You know, some people are saying we're just going to put a verge tree on your verge, whether you like it or not. Other people are saying, so the policy motivation. Trees provide ecosystem services. There are government strategies that aim to increase tree canopy cover. And even though we in this room probably know that trees are great, there's also a lot of people that have opposition or even just apathy towards trees. And so that could be in the form of concerns about risk to their property with limbs falling. It could be annoyance over maintenance responsibilities. They may not want their views to be disrupted. There's a lot of reasons. And so we want to better understand preferences for street trees so that we can communicate this information back to local governments and see if there's opportunities to increase public acceptance of these different strategies that councils are using to increase tree canopy cover. I also care about this personally. This is a view from my balcony that I took this week, and you can see the Royal Show is happening right now, so it is a bit of a hectic picture and a hectic view right now, but what matters is that in front of my apartment in Claremont, my street is entirely covered by London plane trees. And I really care about this because I am a tree person. I love trees, but I hate these trees. I hate almost everything about these trees for a few reasons. One, I'm regularly woken up by the sound of a watering truck pumping water as these are growing. It's very loud and very frequent. They only attract noisy ravens that wake me up first thing in the morning, sometimes at like 4 o'clock in the morning, even though this is right next to the Lake Claremont amazing biodiversity little hotspot. There are beautiful trees. We can see black cockatoos if we go around the corner to these other trees, but not right in front of me. And I get terrible hay fever. So these things let out these little pollen bursts and I'm sneezing constantly. So I really hate my street trees, and I think that there could be an opportunity to improve the verge trees on my street so that I, a tree lover, feel passionate about my street trees and not so much hatred. So we knew we wanted to look at street trees, we knew we were curious about public preferences for them, and we thought that a best-worst scaling exercise would be the best way to look into this issue. So I'm going to present on these 3 different components today. One is a best-worst scaling of the characteristics of trees that people most prefer. The second one looks specifically at tree species that are most and least preferred. And then we look at how the results of the first experiment influence tree species selection. And we do that by collecting data and pausing data halfway through and modifying our survey with a bit of an information treatment. So I'm talking about street trees. If you are new to Perth or unfamiliar with this concept of a verge, this is what they look like. Residential verges are the focus here. And verges are a really unique land classification because they're actually publicly owned, but they're managed privately. So that means that it's the responsibility of local government to put trees on the verge, but the resident would be responsible for it. Bless you. And they exist so that utilities can run underneath them. So when we presented this work in Germany, people were shocked that this type of land exists in Perth because it's so much land. And so it was really interesting when we were talking about gardens, but also interesting and relevant for trees. If you are not familiar with the best-worst scaling process, I'll just briefly introduce it here, but you're in luck. Michael Burton has recorded a series of lectures, mini lectures, giving an introduction to the topic, which you can access on tinyurl/ACER-BWS. So what we get out of best-worst scaling is a ranking. It's not like a choice experiment. We're not looking for a willingness to pay for certain attributes. And it's a really useful technique because in my case, in our case, we're looking at a long list of items that we want to understand a ranking for. So we're looking at 16 different tree characteristics and we're looking at 21 different trees. And if we were to ask people, to just rank those from 1 to 21, that would be extremely challenging. Even with a shorter list, it could be challenging. And we also know that using Likert scales is very common. You know, a scale from 1 to 5, how important is this one attribute? Well, that approach isn't great either, because someone might just say 5 out of 5 for everything. Everything's important. And so this method really forces some trade-offs in those rankings. And then there's also issues with the Likert scale approach where there are interpretation challenges. Some people may view something really important as a 5 out of 5 or a 3 out of 5, whatever. So best worst scaling overall can provide consistent and reliable estimates, and we do set it up using a proper formalized design, call it a balanced incomplete block design, which tells us, you know, how many items to present at a time and how many times people will see each items in the experiment. And then the analysis is similar to choice data. So we collected data using panel recruitment, using a market research company. That happened in late December, early January between the split. We had 1,000 responses and we paused it after 504. And given that we are all environmental economists on this team, we needed to consult with some experts, and one of them is in the room today. Thank you, Marion, for being one of our experts, and Hans, I know, is online. So those are our UWA experts who helped us understand different biodiversity ratings for different trees. And we also worked closely with the town of Claremont, who helped kind of test some of our assumptions about trees that might be offered and why they plant these, and just helped us wrap our head around the science component of this work. Okay, on to the first best worst scaling exercise. So this is our list of 16 different tree characteristics that we included in our first best worst scaling exercise. We tried to be as comprehensive as possible with the different attributes of trees that people would consider. So there are some visual components of it, there are some environmental components. I was really keen to include this allergy component. Shade, we figured, would probably be quite important to people, especially in Perth. Yeah, so we tried to be comprehensive, and every item was kind of listed in a positive direction. This is what the best worst scaling scenario looks like. So each respondent had to make a most and least preferred choice out of a list of 7 items, and they responded to 6 of these scenarios. And so we're talking about trees in your neighborhood, not necessarily the tree that would be on your own verge, because we wanted to include people who maybe didn't have a verge in front of their property. So jumping straight into the results, when you analyze this data, you come up with a coefficient estimate from the regression analysis, and you can also kind of scale these estimates to give a share of preferences. So what that number means is the probability that this item was selected as the most preferred characteristic of people. And then I've just provided a rank so that they can be interpreted a bit more easily. So they're listed in rank of most preferred tree characteristics. Looking at the top 5, the most preferred characteristic was trees that support biodiversity, and that was described as plant, animal, insect biodiversity. Trees that use little water or that are drought resistant was the second most preferred characteristic. And then visual appeal, which is a bit hard to capture, a bit more subjective. But people want pretty trees in front of their property or in their neighborhood. And then maintenance, and whether it's a Western Australia native tree. So we already have some takeaways from this first part of the study. Just a technical note, we did just use the responses to most preferred and not least preferred, because we found that the rankings were actually a bit different depending on which choice you're looking at. Although in both cases, the top 2, biodiversity and water use, were ranked at the top. So we find that environmental characteristics were the highest ranked from our experiment, biodiversity and water use. And visual appeal, that would be hard to really capture in an objective and meaningful way. So it's just those two top characteristics that we use in our information treatment for the second best worst scaling exercise. And that probably doesn't make sense now, but it will when I explain what that looks like. So this study alone provides a meaningful contribution to the literature on understanding preferences for tree characteristics, because everything you see there, everything that I have seen there, is all based on Likert scales. And so this is an example that we can provide that doesn't just say everything matters. We can say things matter to different degrees. Some things matter more to people than other things. Now we move on to the tree species study. So in our survey, we had two separate best worst scaling experiments. The tree species one was actually presented first in the survey, and the tree characteristics one, although I presented it first here, came second in the survey, because we wanted to avoid biasing the tree species results, given that we apply an information treatment that's based on tree characteristics. So it came in first, and it was a bit tricky to figure out which species we should actually include in the survey, because there are so many possible trees that we could choose from, and trees, you know, grow in very specific microclimates, and it's not like you have one list that's appropriate for every single local government. So we needed to start somewhere, and that just meant choosing a few different local governments and looking for some commonalities in the trees that they offered so that we could present a list to the public that maybe they were familiar with. So it took a lot of reading and exploring to try and sort out a meaningful list of 21 trees to present in this experiment. As a starting point, we went to the city of Bayswater, and they provide an amazing amount of information to people. So at the city of Bayswater, the process of planting a new street tree involves the resident going to the city saying, "Hi, I'd like a tree, please." And they say, "Okay," and they will choose one for you. Or they say, "You can look at our list," and this is like a 15-page document, and you could suggest a tree and we'll let you know if it's appropriate for where you are. So that's kind of a cool way of giving people some agency over the process, and they provide maybe too much information to people, but a ton of information. So we started with the Bayswater tree planting palette because we borrowed some of the information here so that we had a pretty comprehensive set of information to include in our experiment. So this is what our best worst scaling experiment looked like. It's a bit more detailed in the tree species component than it was in the tree characteristics. So we presented 5 trees at a time, a little bit busier, but we did some testing and people seemed to be okay with capturing 5 at a time. Same setup, which tree would you most and least prefer to see in your neighborhood? And so initially we gave them the common name, whether it was Australia native, Western Australia native, or exotic from outside. We gave them a silhouette of the tree with the width and height dimensions and an image of the flowers when they're in bloom. This is what it looked like for the second roughly 500 respondents, where everything's the same. It's still 5 trees at a time, but we added information about biodiversity as low, medium, or high, and that's where we really needed to rely on our experts to help decide what that classification should be, and a water rating that came from Water Corporation. So 0 drops means it doesn't really need to be watered once it's established. 1 drop means about once a week watering, and 2 drops mean about twice a week watering. So jumping into these ranking results, we can see ranked from 1 to 21. These are the tree species that people most preferred, and we were just looking at the best responses here again. Then I'm comparing these to our stage 2. So that's post the information treatment, when people were also given information about biodiversity and water. And you can see quite a bit of movement with this new information treatment. Some consistency in the top 2. And in a lot of cases, when you block it, things kind of stay in the same zone, but things do move. Another way of representing these movements is by comparing the share of preferences from the pre-information treatment on the y-axis and the share of preferences on the x-axis. And so along the line, you can see if the share didn't change, it would be on that diagonal line. But I've just highlighted a few trees that really changed with that information treatment. Yeah, the jacaranda was more preferred in stage 1 before they were given information, and these ones performed better with higher biodiversity after the treatment. This is just more of kind of a qualitative look at how things were moving. So we know things moved around a little bit, and we can identify a few trees that moved up and down, but we wanted to dig into the intervention a little bit more. And the way we did this was, rather than just modeling choice of most preferred tree as a function of the tree species itself, as just a binary specific tree, we decided to unpack the characteristics underlying those trees and model choice as a function of the characteristics. And so in some cases, they didn't see all this information. Like in stage 1, respondents only saw the origin of the tree and the height and the width in terms of the attributes that we can actually quantify and plug into the model. Whereas in stage 2, they also saw the biodiversity and water use. So this helps us understand a little bit more behind what is going on with those movements in tree rankings, but it didn't have an experimental design, and there are correlations between attributes. Stepping through this model here, we can see that in this table that I'm presenting here, the first estimate will just be in general, and then the second treatment is an interaction with the second line is an interaction with post-treatment. So we can see that people like WA native trees, but then after the information treatment, they kind of become indifferent about the WA native. So that's something for us to dig into. Pre-treatment, people like AU natives, but then post-treatment, they actually prefer exotic trees over Australian natives. Also kind of interesting. People prefer tall and skinny trees? Yes, but these are kind of correlated. People prefer trees with biodiversity, medium biodiversity relative to low biodiversity, and the post-treatment didn't impact this. Prior to being told anything about biodiversity, people already like high biodiversity relative to low biodiversity, and then when we give them information about biodiversity, they really like high biodiversity trees. And this is maybe the most interesting finding, that relative to low water use trees, before people are given information about the water use of trees, they prefer trees that use more water. But then when we tell them how much water is used by trees, then they actually prefer less water use trees that use less water. And that is the same story for the high water use trees. So another way of showing these results is, again, to just look at the rankings. So you've seen these actual ranks from the best worst scaling from 1 to 21 before, but now we also provide this fitted value means the ranking of what we think people should like to see based on what they have told us from those coefficient estimates of size and origin and water use and biodiversity. And there are some very clear misalignments here. Like according to what people have told us they like about water use and biodiversity and size and the things that we could quantify, people shouldn't really like jacarandas that much, but they love them. They were ranked #1. And tuckaroos also performed better than we would expect them to perform. They should be ranked 16th according to what on average they tell us that they like, but they're actually ranked 9. And then a couple trees perform less well than we would expect. So people don't really like canucas or Chinese pistachios, when really they should be ranked higher. Pardon?
The canuka is, oh, I see, yeah, 18's lower.
Yeah.
They're the opposite.
Oh, yeah, so, yeah. Yeah, that's right, just Chinese pistachio is the one. And we kind of have a hunch that maybe it's the name that might be, I don't know, we need to dig into this a little bit more. So maybe this is what people are thinking of, these beautiful purple streets, and maybe this is why jacaranda is ranked so highly. All this to say that trees are complex, and we have learned a little bit about the characteristics, but people still hold on to certain ideals of trees. So the key takeaways from this second best worst scaling survey are that people prefer biodiversity supporting trees, and that becomes a stronger impact when we provide information about the biodiversity benefits of the trees. People actually prefer trees that use more water until they're told about the water use requirements of a tree. So we want to know, what is it about these high water use trees that initially makes people prefer them more? That's something that we need to dig into a little bit more. Something is clearly missing from our second model of explaining why people are choosing certain trees. And then given that we saw that the WA native is no longer significantly preferred after the information treatment, we suspect that people see WA native and are using that as an indicator of the biodiversity and water use benefits. And that's why that kind of canceled out when we gave more information. So that's interesting because when councils provide information about their trees, it is quite common that they include WA native as one of the characteristics. So wrapping this all up, I've included a picture of a black cockatoo because as Hans went through our list of trees, he was quite upset to learn that none of the trees that we had included in our best worst scaling survey was particularly good for the black cockatoo. So that's an area for future work for us to maybe look into tree selection and preferences for trees that could specifically provide habitat for this bird. But the takeaway is that people prefer trees that support biodiversity and that use less water, and that the information that we give to people really does influence the way they rank their trees. And so we are keen to communicate this back to local governments to suggest ways that they could revise their communications of their tree programs to hopefully get people more on board with signing up for certain birch trees.
So where does this guy live? I have never seen him outside.
Well,
Really?
he's in Perth.
That's a red
Oh, and I have seen other types, but not
Yeah.
this one.
The most common one are the canopies, which have got the white feathers in the tail. The red ones are not as common in Perth.
I think, are they around Shenton Field Station?
There are some.
Yeah, there's 3 different types of black cockatoos.
Yeah.
And all 3 can be found in Perth.
Yeah. Around here, I think it's the red one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the most common because we
Never
get
seen this one outside.
and then you've got
Look up.
canopies.
I need to look up the
Boredoms, Bodine.
Yeah, you can see them in Claremont. They're, yeah. It's pretty magical.
Around campus.
These
Yeah.
guys are spectacular.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah.
lots.
Yeah.
Thank you.
yeah. Clearly you can design a map for us to go on a cockatoo. Yeah, that's all I have, and I'm happy to take questions and suggestions for improving this work.
One question, could you provide any information about the time length it takes for final height or final, how long it takes for me to see the tree at the final shape?
That's a good question.
Speed of growth was one of the attributes.
It
of the
was.
First one,
How
but
big,
not time, like no time element.
was thinking like if I want to see the tree. Like,
Yeah, that's the growth.
There's the growth.
And so it wasn't
Growth rate.
significantly different than the base one. So it wasn't really a
So that's an
factor.
information is provided in years, right? How long it takes.
It wasn't specific. It was just
Biomass.
the time it
inches.
takes to grow to full size. And so we didn't provide specific information about, X years to be full size. Yes. Mhm.
So you discussed about the needs of the biodiversity. So what about the natural habitat? Do you speak about the natural habitat or like you want to plant like artificially placed?
So the biodiversity was mostly about the benefits that the tree could provide to the local environment. And so biodiversity was communicated in terms of it being potential habitat and food sources for birds and insects and small animals.
So what about the plants and trees which is already grown in that place? Does that contribute to the biodiversity needs?
Yeah, that's interesting. We didn't really consider like diversity across trees on a verge, and I think that's a really good point, especially when you look at my verge, which is all one species. This one terrible London plane everywhere. But that would be also another thing we could look at to see how many trees, different types of trees do people prefer to see on the neighborhood? Do they like just seeing the consistency? Maybe this has some visual appeal, or do they prefer more diversity? Something to look at. Yes.
Thank you. It's very nice presentation. And I think I belong to the group who chose Jacaranda because it's very beautiful.
Yeah.
But I have a comment related to the way you design the experiment. You show the slide for measurable scaling when you provide information is included. So water use information.
Yeah.
Do you think there is parting results here? You provide the two, so it can end up with synergistic effect of both information from biodiversity and water use at the same time. Whereas in the way you analyze independently. That's the effect from biodiversity information and the effect from water use information.
Yeah.
Whereas the information is provided to respondent both at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's one question I have, and the other just for clarification. You have two stages here, so you survey the same respondent, so with and without information or
different respondents. Yeah.
Between subjects.
Yeah.
But still, the effect for both still hold when you analyze the data.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. It would have been interesting to split it up and consider just showing water or just showing biodiversity and seeing them together. Too late, but good idea for next time.
So I noticed that when you showed the what's that called? The yellow gum, the one with red flowers, number 1 term.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the one that the council has decided to plant outside my house. They didn't give anyone any choice; they just planted that.
Yeah.
But there is another one, same type, but with yellow flowers, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's red flowering gum and red flowering yellow gum, which is super annoying when you're coating this. Yeah.
They attract a lot of bees
Mm.
and a lot of birds in the morning. They are quite good. So my question is, okay, so you ranking, at the top, you are sort of identifying the best tree, basically. And
The most preferred tree.
The most preferred tree.
Yeah.
And also at the bottom, you are sort of doing that, right?
Yeah.
So how did the councils decide? For example, in my case, it seems they have chosen the best one, right?
Yeah.
So what's the history? How did they
Yeah.
get to that?
Yeah.
Way before this research.
Yeah.
That's one. The other one is you were talking about the tree outside your house.
Yes.
It's not in the list, right?
No, it's not on this list. It's also on the list of Water Corp's. Please don't plant.
Please don't.
Yeah.
Okay. So the other issue is, do you have a sense of how the different councils would rank if you had to apply this to judge how well they are doing?
Yeah.
And are the newer suburbs doing a better job than the older ones?
Yeah.
Yeah. And finally, I live maybe even 200 meters away from Old Park, which is massive, right? Why do I need to support biodiversity on my verge? Why can't I have just a nice tree like Jakarta?
Yeah.
There's too many trees, right?
Yeah. Well, verges are pretty unique because they really provide an opportunity to have some continuity in that habitat. So that's kind of why maybe it would be.
Well, in some places that's useful, but in some places, so if you go around here, you don't need to support biodiversity on every tree. It's just there is so many parts. So in some places we could afford to have just nice trees.
It's good that you're sitting far apart right now.
Variety is good, actually. The city shouldn't be, overall, the council should also, even streets.
Yeah.
You need variety.
Yeah.
If we have all similar trees.
I think there's an amazing amount of variety that's available to grow here that are pretty and could be preferred, and that also provides low water use and high biodiversity benefits. It's not like there's just one tree that is suitable to serve these purposes. But to your point about why you got a red flowering gum, every council is different. And so in some cases, like they'll just bulk order 200 of one type of trees, and that's what they're doing for next year. And they're just putting them wherever there's a gap. And other ones are more demand driven, like City of Bayswater, where you can request a tree and have some say in what you get, and other times you request a tree and maybe you have a few to choose from. It's wildly different across councils.
Yeah. And we've heard a story that councillor, like these councils are small, and you'll often get a councillor elected who will just decide that they're a tree councillor for their term, and they'll just make all the tree plants based on what they think is pretty. And we've heard that a lot of large amounts of Claremont have historically been planted to different types of trees because some random person in the last 20 years has said, I like that one. So this is the only tree we're planting for the next 10 years. And then the parks people will be trying to do anything else. And the councillor will say, no, I'm the councillor. So it's pretty random in a place like Perth because there's so many elected officials who can just get involved as well. So I think that's part of the randomness of the history of these trees.
Mary, do you have a comment?
Usually there's this sort of non-agreement from the councillors and horticulture people. So I'm not quite sure what the horticulture people do, but they go and buy these terrible trees and plot them out, and that's probably because they were cheap, or they got conned by the nursery or something. But some really bad choices go out.
Yeah.
And the councillors may be all in favour of doing this, and then the staff don't carry through. So it's quite fraught.
Yeah. It's a surprisingly saucy topic to research.
How do you hear about City of Netherlands tokenizing trees? Like using tokens for trees and having
like financial tokens, or like a financial token?
Yeah. Not for financial purposes, but for having a digital identity of each tree in the council. That's an initiative that I have here.
Yeah.
I think it has some relationship.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
I'll look into it.
Yeah. Okay. I think there is an online question from Abby. Abby, can you unmute yourself, and if you can speak up?
We can just read it out.
Yeah.
So carnabies, boddens, and red-tailed black cockatoos are all found in Perth. Older trees, even dead trees with hollows, are pretty important for nesting. I wonder how people feel about those. Yeah. And is there a part two? She adds, they're far too cheeky to be mad at. And yeah, I think that there's clearly a need for us to build on this because we've learned more in the process. And black cockatoos are really important to a lot of people, so maybe we need to emphasize the contribution to their habitat and, yeah.
jacaranda issue. If you go to the regression model, yeah, this one.
Yeah.
So the prediction as to how people should think about jacaranda is built upon the regression results out of here.
Yes.
But I haven't got a measure of beauty.
I know.
Yeah.
Because how do you quantify beauty to different people?
Well, we could potentially, I was just thinking that, you could actually give a series of these images to people and just say, okay, how, you might even want to go and talk to somebody else who might give some guidance as to how one asks the question about how beautiful is something.
Yeah.
But then I was wondering whether you could just feed that in. It'd be a variable. According to the tree, it'd just be a variable of the tree that jacarandas are universally rated beautiful by everybody.
Yeah.
And that's explaining, you pop it in the model, that explains what. So if you have you need a beauty score.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the red flowering it's very good flowers, very nice. But I think if you think of shape, the shape of the tree should be a consideration.
The shape.
It's not the best tree. That's red flowering gum.
Yeah.
The shape of the tree also matters.
You don't like your tree. So you don't like it because, why don't you like your tree?
No, I'm saying it's not just the flowers. The shape of the tree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did think about, like, could we quantify?
Yeah.
We do, but how would we categorize those in a meaningful way?
No.
So you're always getting back to art and to rank which is best, which is sort of like you're just internalizing it then. I think you would want to have something, you want some measure which got something to do with the fact that, I don't know, I might just prefer red. I mean, you could even almost do it by, are they getting close to just putting dummy variables on new trees again?
Talk about, colors.
Color of flower.
Or
Yeah.
something, or wavelength, or
Colourfulness.
something
Intensity
which
of color.
Which
Yeah.
is not very, well, almost needs to be objective in some way, which is going to be really hard for the beauty thing. But yeah, so that would be interesting. So it would just explain why the prediction. It's not there's a problem with the prediction, it's just the fact that
we're clearly missing something in the
you've got a
prediction.
missing variable in there, which is just consistent for everybody, that if you show the picture of the jacarandas,
Yeah.
they know what this thing looks like, and they like that.
Yeah. They are beautiful. When I came here for my interview, I came home and told people about the purple trees and the petals that were everywhere.
Yeah, you did.
They're amazing.
Where's that from?
Oh, I took it from the internet.
Yeah. One of the problems is that that's probably taken in New South Wales.
Yeah.
They get summer rain.
Yeah.
And they don't grow all that well.
Yeah.
Often.
Yeah.
Because occasionally they do. Somebody waters their verge and gives it lots of fertiliser.
Yeah.
But they look pretty terrible.
Spindly.
Yeah.
Spindly. And there seems to be a cultivar that gets all its leaves and then it has a few poor flowers. And it's not like that when they do this great mass flowering.
Yeah.
There's one in Prescott Court that just, puts out leaves and then a flower. And it just looks awful. I mean, it does, it looks really scraggy.
Yeah.
But, so it sort of, that's what everybody wants their street to look like.
Yeah.
People must have seen
They
enough
might
nice ones to rank them highly.
Yeah.
I mean, there's one in Subiaco that's near an antique shop, and that one alone could influence. Seeing that one time
That'll
could
be the good
influence.
cultivar.
Yeah.
But a lot of the ones you see around are that curly leafing one. And, they don't look great at all.
Yeah.
Maybe have a look at Archdeacon Street.
Yeah.
Four streets from here.
Yeah.
That has got very big trees with canopy.
That's Carriageons.
Yeah.
A lot of, that's a whole mix there.
It's a mix.
It's a real mix there. It's just that they've been allowed to grow big.
Mm. We've given it enough credit. We'll go back to this one now. That will be the final word. Oh, yes.
Have you considered any after effects of planting and non-native planting?
Yes.
Like, for example, I can see some Chinese kind of plants like that. So have you considered any after effects? After effects means that does it affect like biodiversity negatively or positively?
Yeah. I don't know the science well enough to be able to comment on that. But it probably isn't attracting good.
But you're already measuring biodiversity anyway.
Yeah.
So it would be included because that one would have a low biodiversity rate
Yeah.
score.
Yeah.
The Chinese
Pistachios.
drinks
Hands are like-
sticky stuff,
Yeah.
some sort of waxy sticky stuff.
Okay, so maybe that's why people.
They don't like that.
Yeah.
They know about it.
Yeah.
Which one has waxy stickies to it?
Chinese tallow.
Oh,
Yeah. It's nice in a park, but not.
Not
You
good in the
park your car under it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really stuff like.
Yeah.
Thank you, Claire.